There's a version of you that has spent years making yourself easier to digest, softening your words before you speak them, apologizing for your needs, rehearsing explanations in your head before a conversation has even started. You walk into a room already defending yourself against a verdict no one has handed down yet. And the exhausting part isn't the explaining. It's that it never works. You explain, and they still misunderstand. You justify, and they still judge. You shrink yourself down to something manageable and still feel like too much. That pattern, that compulsive need to make others comfortable with who you are, is not a communication style. It's a wound, and it goes deeper than most people realize. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the hidden architecture of the human psyche. One of his most profound insights was this: what we do repeatedly, compulsively, without conscious choice, is never random. It's always symbolic. It always points to something unresolved, something we learned before we had language for it. Overexplaining is one of those things. And once you understand what it's really doing, you can never unsee it. At some point, early in your life, you got a message. It didn't come as a speech. It came as a feeling, a subtle, persistent signal that your presence required justification, that you were too sensitive, too intense, too needy, too much, or somehow not enough. The specific words don't matter. The nervous system doesn't remember sentences, it remembers conclusions. And the conclusion you drew was this: I am not automatically acceptable. I have to earn my place. That belief buried itself. It became part of your operating system, invisible and unquestioned. And from that point forward, every time you sensed potential disapproval, every time someone went quiet or looked at you strangely or seemed distant, your nervous system activated its old solution: explain, justify, make them understand, restore the connection. Jung called the part of you that hides what feels unacceptable the shadow, not evil, just exiled. The parts of you that were too inconvenient, too emotional, too real for the environments you grew up in. You didn't choose to exile them. You did it to survive. But the cost is that you began performing instead of existing. You learned to manage other people's perceptions of you rather than trusting your own reality. Over-explaining is the performance of a person who doesn't yet believe they have the right to simply be. Here's what it costs you, and this part is important to sit with. Every time you over-explain, you send your own nervous system a message. My authentic response was not enough. I need to fix it. Over time, you train yourself to distrust your instincts. You second-guess your feelings before you've even felt them fully. You become a stranger to your own inner voice because you've spent so long translating it for an audience. Your relationships suffer quietly. When you over-explain, you're not actually connecting. You're negotiating. There's a fundamental difference. Connection requires two people showing up as themselves. Negotiation requires one person managing the other's reaction. You may be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone because no one in your life is really meeting you. They're meeting the carefully curated, pre-approved version you offer them. And the people who require constant explanation from you, they are not your people. Genuine belonging doesn't demand that kind of labor. There's also something Jung observed about power. Real power, not dominance, not control, but the quiet authority that comes from a person who is fully inhabited by themselves. He noticed that people who have done the inner work, who have integrated their shadow, who have stopped warring with their own nature, they carry a different quality of presence. They don't need to convince. They don't perform. They don't collapse under the weight of someone else's disapproval. They are, in the truest sense, grounded. Silence is part of that groundedness. Not coldness, not withdrawal, but the silence of someone who trusts that their presence speaks without constant verbal scaffolding. When you stop explaining yourself compulsively, something shifts. People feel it. There's a quality to a person who doesn't need your approval that is deeply magnetic, not because they're aloof, but because they're real. They're not trying to manage your experience of them. They're just there. You've met people like this. You know exactly what it feels like to be around them. That's not a personality type. It's a level of integration. It's available to you. So how does the shift begin? Not with discipline, not with forcing yourself to shut up or play it cool. That's just suppression dressed as strength. And suppression always leaks. The shift begins with a question you start asking in the moments before you over-explain. What am I afraid will happen if I don't justify this? Let that question land. Don't rush past it. Because the answer, when you're honest, usually isn't about the person in front of you. It's about the old conclusion, the one that said you needed to earn your place. And the moment you can see it as a conclusion rather than a fact, you create space. You're no longer reacting from the wound. You're responding from the present. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, requires exactly this. Not the dismantling of your sensitivity or your desire for connection, but the reclaiming of your center, the decision made quietly and repeatedly to no longer outsource your sense of worth to other people's understanding of you. You don't owe anyone a performance of yourself. You don't owe justification for your boundaries, your choices, your feelings, or your pace. These things are not up for public review. They are yours. Some people will be unsettled by the version of you that stops explaining. Let them be. A person who needs you to constantly justify your existence is not offering you safety. They're offering you a cage with comfortable lighting, and you've been calling it connection. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being endlessly known and still not seen. And there's a particular kind of freedom, quiet, almost terrifying at first, in simply letting people think what they think, in saying what you mean once, clearly, without the footnotes, in allowing silence to do what words have been desperately trying to do, what you're really looking for, beneath the explaining, beneath the managing, beneath the shape-shifting, is rest. The rest of being fully yourself without consequence, of not having to prepare your inner world for external inspection. That rest doesn't come from finally finding the right words. It doesn't come from becoming so articulate that no one could possibly misunderstand you. It comes from the moment you stop needing to be understood in order to feel okay. That's the threshold. That's where the transformation lives, not in becoming someone harder, more distant, or more guarded, but in becoming someone so genuinely at home in themselves that they no longer confuse external validation with internal peace. You can be warm and boundaried, open and unhurried, present and undefended. These things are not contradictions. They are the signature of someone who has stopped abandoning themselves in order to stay in the room. The silent power isn't about withholding. It's about finally having something so solid inside you that you no longer need the world to confirm it. That is the work. And it begins the moment you decide that who you are does not require an explanation.